Hey guys, what's up? So today I'm going to be looking at two monster high gain amps and comparing them against each other to see which one dominates and which one has the most bang for the buck, because there is quite a bit of a discrepancy in price here. So stay tuned. Okay guys, so in that high gain mix, these two amps are pretty distinguishable. I would say that the PRS is a bit darker, a bit more round, and a little bit more growl in that low mids, whereas the ENGL is a bit more high definition, a little bit more that top end sizzle, and just kind of an overall more refined sound. One of the things about this comparison that I really wanted to dig into was the idea that these two amps are rated as being fairly low wattage. This is a 25 watt head. This is a 15 watt head, but both of these amps are pretty loud and they both have full size power tube sections that really drive this 412 speaker cab. Now I just happen to have the KT77 version of the ENGL Fireball 25. The standard version comes with 6L6s, which is a bit more on par with what is in the MT15, which is a 5881 dual power tube section. Now, the 5881 is a little bit more aggressive than the standard 6L6. It has a little bit less headroom, but to be honest, this amp has one of the best clean tones. And if we were going to talk about clean tones today, which I'm not even going to dive into clean tones, I'm just going to stay high gain here, I would say that the MT15 has a better clean channel than the ENGL Fireball 25. Over here with the KT77s, these are more in the family of the EL34. They are a bit more of a higher headroom version of the EL34. And one of the biggest differences between the 6L6 version and the KT77 is the volume output on the clean channel. I've scoured the internet for all different versions of comparisons of the 6L6 and the KT77 of this particular amp. I think Henning Pauly probably has the best one, and I'll link it up here. When he went through these two amps, you know, the KT77 and the 6L6 of the Fireball, what he found was that there wasn't much tonal difference on the high gain, but when it came to the clean channel, there was a bit of a volume bump on the KT77. The features on these amps are pretty comparable in terms of EQ and what you have going on. When it comes to the high gain stuff, there is a mid boost on here. They both have power attenuation. This one you can cut down to 7 watts. This one has a power soak that has 2 actual steps down, so you can go from full power to mid power to low power, and then you can completely turn the speaker cab off. The one thing that this does have that is a really cool feature is a built-in noise gate that goes, you know, between the preamp and the power amp section, so you don't have to run a 4-cable method if you don't want to. Whereas this one does not have that. The other thing I'll say before I get into it, because I know a lot of the comments, if I get a lot of comments, will point out the fact that these first generation of MT15s tended to be a bit noisy, and there is a little bit of a low hum throughout both channels, and it carries over in the effects loop, and it's noticeable to a degree. It's not egregiously bad, at least this particular one, but it is something that does seem to be there. But with that said, when it comes to the price discrepancy between these two amps, this first generation MT15 can still be got for about $500 brand new. They used to be about $749. That's where the new generation kind of sits at. The new generation does have a different configuration in terms of the channels, and I believe they also got rid of that noise issue. But the ENGL Fireball, whether it's the 6L6 or the KT77 version, is going to be about $1,300. So you're looking at two kind of different worlds in terms of what you're paying for. And so what I want to do here is say, well, do you really need to go branch out to get this, to get your metal high gain sound? Or something like this that's more affordable and easily accessible, perfectly fine. So let's just get into it. Okay, so first up, I'm on the MT15. I'm not going to run any kind of boost pedals right now, and I'm going to get into why the boost pedal thing kind of matters with these 2 amps in a minute. But I'm just going to A-B back and forth so I can give you kind of a baseline of how I dial in these amps. And today what I got going on here is this budget Spira guitar. This is the S450. I did a video on this, and I also currently have the Corrigan Pickups, which I did a video for a couple weeks ago, because I think they're really chunky and sound good. And that's what I'm going to be running in through here. I got a SM57 and a Lewitt DM440 dynamic mic down here kind of paired up. And I'm going to blend those two together and present the sound to you guys. And so here's what I got on the MT15, just my baseline high gain tone. Roll over to the ENGL. So yeah, pretty different sounding, and they're both going through the same cab, same speaker mic'd up. One of the things that's obvious here, and I'm trying to volume match as best I can in the room, and one of the challenges about that is because they're voiced so differently, the ENGL just tends to sound a little bit louder because it has more of that top end. My ears just hear that high-end sizzle, that high-end kind of clarity, and automatically feel like, hey, that's louder. But it's not true. They're pretty much equal in the room. The other thing that's obvious is with the MT15, the low end and the low mids are much more rumbly, and it makes the sound a little bit more big in the room. Not necessarily loud, not necessarily like it's more forward, but it just sounds like bigger. And that's interesting because the bass I have a little bit up here. In fact, I could probably come back a little bit on the bass. I have the mids up on here, whereas I have the mids cut on here, because that low mid on the MT15 is very apparent in the actual tonal profile. And so that's why I kind of feel like this amp is a better platform for doing boost pedals or any kind of, upfront EQ shaping, whereas this amp can take pedals, it just doesn't really need it. And so if I'm back on the ENGL here, the amount of gain, and my lead gain is not even at halfway, the amount of gain and how tight it can be is already kind of there. If I add a boost pedal or an overdrive like the SD1 here, it's just almost unnecessary and a little over the top. It's not bad, but if I wanted to use a boost pedal with the ENGL, I would probably put the gain down a little bit, presence, make sure it's, up in the middle, and then I could turn the treble down a little bit. Mids can stay where they are. doesn't sound bad. It's just, it might not be necessary. Whereas if you go over to the MT15, a boost pedal definitely helps it out. Without the overdrive, pretty not really flubby, but definitely a bit rounder and a bit more, you know, not quite as clear, kind of really dark. Kind of like a Mesa Boogie, but with way more mids going on. Yeah, a little bit of saturation, that little bit of push and tone shaping up front definitely helps out the MT15 a bit more. Going over to the ENGL without a boost. Push that gain up, you know, close to halfway. Maybe give a little bit of presence. Scale back the bass if you want to tighten it up. It really doesn't need it. If I go to something with a little bit more tone shaping capability, like the Direwolf, keep it on the low gain setting, tone up, you know, level, run it like a tube screamer. Yeah, so I don't think you need a boost pedal, but when you do add an overdrive, especially a more high-end one with a little bit more tweakability, the ENGL is definitely going to give you a bit more variability in how aggressive you can go without it sounding muddy or somewhat overdriven to the point of, you know, lacking clarity. Again, if I go over to the MT15, still really good. Just way darker, and that mid-range is just way more centered towards the low end of the spectrum. So if I turn up the mids, kind of like I have it on the ENGL, if I kind of match kind of what's going on with the mid control on here. I like it. It's just a little bit too much in the mid-range. Scooping the mids on the MT15. That's about as close as I've gotten these to sound like each other with the Direwolf in front. I will say that I have the mids up on here. I have the mids cut on here. You really do have to push the treble and the presence up on the MT15 to get it to brighten up. And it starts to get a little spiky. I find that the ENGL doesn't really get spiky or piercing. I find like the ENGL has a smooth top end even if you push the presence and the treble up. But I don't have the presence and treble up at all really here. If I go to the presence, you know, if I try to add more presence, Yeah, the presence on the ENGL, you turn it up, it just becomes more forward and more like hit you in the face. The presence on here doesn't really get enough to really unblanket the amp a little bit. You really do have to turn the treble up all the way, and then it gets really spiky. Not a big fan of that particularly, but honestly, these two amps aren't too far off from each other. So, you know, what does that mean? Does that tell you that you really need to spend the double or more of the money to get, you know, something that will work for your situation? I don't know. I'm actually kind of thrown for a loop because working with these two amps independently, I thought I had a pretty clear picture that this one was going to always be like that much better, but this one can get you pretty close. Just roll in with the Direwolf again. There's a mid boost function on here that kind of pulls out those low mids and some of that like more just, you know, overall mid range a bit. For rhythm and for like chuggy stuff, I think it's a little bit much. I think it'd be better for like a lead, you know, kind of tone. Keep that off. Scooping the mids on here definitely gets you more into thrash territory. Yeah, I will say the EQ on the ENGL is much more usable. I think the mid control and where the mids kind of come in on the sweep are more versatile, or at least they have somewhat of a range that's more liking to my ears. Whereas this mid control kind of just pumps up the growl or kind of scoops out the growl and doesn't really give the best texture for the mids. I definitely like the treble control on this better. It doesn't really get spiky. It just kind of opens up the top end, kind of gives it more air, which is something that you'd think the presence would do. But the presence on here just really is like, how forward do you want the sound to be? And I kind of like that. To be honest, the price discrepancy is kind of on the verge of where this potentially is worth it if you're looking for something that you know you're not going to have to put a lot of work into to get the sound you want. If you want a sound for high gain metal, this isn't going to necessarily require you to buy like a boutique overdrive pedal, and it's definitely not going to require you to feel as though you're missing out on something because you went with something cheaper. So that's kind of the catch-22 of when you want something, when you know that you like something and you're negotiating with yourself whether or not you should get it, and you're looking at something lower priced going, well, maybe that'll be good enough. You're always going to have that in the back of your head, like, well, what if I had gone for the bigger thing, you know? And so just keep that in mind. The PRS can definitely get you close to what's going on here. It's got a very well done overall tonal texture. It's loud as hell. It's very loud. In fact, I would almost say that this PRS MT15 can kind of outdo this 25 watt ENGL in terms of just overall output somehow. And I think, you know, they always say they underrate these, and I'm pretty sure that's true. The other thing about this is it has a really great clean channel, which I'm not getting into, but just take my word for it. If it was just clean channels, this one would win. The newer versions of these tend to be quieter, and I don't know. It's up to you to make the decision, but I will say if I was going to put my money where my mouth is, the ENGL would be the one that would win out for me in terms of high gain and knowing that I would get any tone that I could ever want out of this thing. Whereas with this one, it's really good. It can get me really close. In fact, it has a really good different texture to it, especially with the low end on this thing. If you're looking more for something that kind of does a little bit of that Mesa Boogie Soldano voice, you know, especially in the low mids, and still has the ability to give you that like British crunch kind of in the top end, this will do it for you. This is just a German beast. I don't know. Drop your comments below. Let me know what you think about these two amps, kind of how I had them dialed in here, what you heard in the mix, and, you know, we'll discuss, you know, whatever opinions you have about it. So anyway, that's what I got. So see you guys later.